And related to that, as we get started today, I don't know how you view God or kind of your background and how you interact with him, but some of those are the questions that I get in this series. And I grew up with a very distinct vision of God, or like what he looked like, or my expectations of him. And I don't know about you, but for me, God was a God that was he had dark hair for whatever reason. He had dark hair, and he didn't have a beard, and he stood in heaven. He had a set of glasses. I don't know why. This is just how I saw God. And he had a set of glasses, and he also had a big, long legal pad. You know what I'm talking about, the big, long ones? And in my head, this is me as a kid and even me growing up, he would take notes on the things that I did right and the things I did wrong. That he was like keeping a tally on what I was doing. And at first, that didn't bother me. And that's kind of the version of God I was given as a kid, and it's the version of God that I was given as I grew up and with my faith and with my family. And first, that was okay, until I started to get older and I started to realize, even as a young child, that the stuff I was hearing at church was that, God keeps track of those things. Okay, God keeps track of those things. And then but they were also telling me at the same time that God and sin, they don't mix well. And so consequently, God and sinners, they don't mix well. And then when I start thinking, well, God's keeping a tally of everything, and God and sinners, they don't mix well, and God and sin doesn't mix well. And then I started to get older, and even growing up, I started to mess up, started to make mistakes, started to sin. And then all of a sudden, this idea that God and sin and God and sinners don't interact with one another and they can't coexist, or not there, this concept that God doesn't interact with it, they don't mix or play well, caused me to say, well, I must not mix well with God, because I do the things in the Bible they tell me not to do sometimes. I behave the way I shouldn't. I say things that I shouldn't. I say that when I was younger, I said things to my mom I shouldn't, said things to my dad, treated people kind of poorly. So I would say, well, then that means that God's not for me. He's for those other people, and he's available for those other people. But if it's all about sin and it's all about God, and those two can't interact at any capacity, then hey, you know what? God is obviously not for me. And eventually I came to the place where I was like, maybe it's just not my thing. Like, God isn't available for me because I'm too much of a sinner, and I've got too many issues. And then I grew up, and as I started to grow up and I got into my 20s, I kept making a lot of mistakes, did a lot of things that I shouldn't, said a lot of things that I shouldn't, treated people pretty poorly like I shouldn't. And then it was like, well, God's definitely not going to want to interact or mix with me at all. And I don't know about you, but here's the truth of it. You have a version of God. I don't know whether you've thought about it or put it into words like that, but you have a version of God that was given to you as a child, and a version of God that you grew up with, and that eventually, kind of matured to where you are now. And for some of you, you had the same version of God that I did, where he was always keeping track on a legal pad, and he knew your goods and your bads, and somehow he was kind of like Santa Claus, like he showed up and you get good or bad, and when you get to heaven, he's gonna show up and he's gonna be like, hey, why did you hit little Timmy with the toy? Because he took your dump truck? Was that the right thing to do? That's how I figured God was going to interact with me. But the truth is that wasn't it. And it framed the way that I saw God. But I don't know what it is for you, but you have a version of God or a lens at which you see God through. And maybe it's angry God, where he's just mad all the time. He's so frustrated and can't stand you. Or maybe he's just disappointed in you. All you do is disappoint God because you can't live up to his expectations. Maybe it's like this concept of God being holy, and so he's there, but you can't get near him, but he's over there. He's like in heaven watching you, but you can't get close because he's too holy for you. You're too nasty and disgusting. Heathen dog sinner, can't get too close to the Lord, right? And I don't know what version of God that you grew up with and what you kind of walked in here today with, but that version of God is probably not accurate. It's probably not the correct version of God. And the story we're going to look at today, many of you, as we start to read it, you're going to say, that's not an Easter story, Brandon. Why are you talking about it at Easter? And I'm going to make an argument, if you give me a few minutes, that it absolutely is an Easter story. In fact, it's kind of encompasses all of Easter in it, because you're going to hear it and you're going to be like, Brandon, you're supposed to talk about the resurrection and the empty tomb. I did that at the sunrise service. You weren't there, so now you get this one, okay? Just tell you. But the truth is that this story captures all of the gospel in one little chapter. And it's a chapter found in Mark. It's Mark chapter 2. So this is early in Christ's ministry, early in Jesus' ministry. And here he is, and he's beside the lake. He's beside the Sea of Galilee. And a large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. And then, Jesus there's a lot of followers now. He's done some miracles, not a whole lot yet, but they're following him. And as he walked along, so as he's going along, minding his own business, moving throughout stuff, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at a tax collector's booth. Now, this is Matthew. Mark calls him Levi, but this is Matthew. And see, for us, we hit tax collector and we just kind of zip right by it, but we lose the cultural context of what tax collector actually meant. Tax collector meant that Matthew was rejected by culture. He was rejected by his family. He was rejected by everybody that he would have hoped loved him and accepted him. He would have had no friends. His friends would have only been other tax collectors and sinners, people who were against God. He wouldn't have been allowed in the temple because he's not bringing that sin in. And the reason is because as a tax collector, he had a booth set up outside on the road. And every time you would go by, you'd have to pay the taxes. And as you pay, and now Matthew would have been rich too, because his booth was in between two kingdoms, two minor kingdoms in the Roman Empire. So if anybody's going between the two places, they're paying Matthew a tax. Not only are they paying Matthew a tax based on the Roman tax system, Matthew had to get a little bit on the side too. Matthew had to make some money on the side. So Matthew's very wealthy, but he's completely empty. There's nothing there because he has no relationship with his family, would have been completely disowned. And the temple and the religious leaders would have said, you're cursed by God. God doesn't want anything to do with you. It would have been completely just rejected by people. The Romans didn't even like him, and he was working for them. So Matthew is separate from everybody. And see, Matthew would also have a Roman guard that was there, and if he could actually exact payment out of somebody, even if they had already paid the taxes, because he had a Roman guard with a sword. All he had to do was say, hey, that Brandon owes taxes this week, and I could have paid him last week, but it didn't matter. I was showing up, and then Matthew would take all that money and pocket that money. So consequently, people in his community absolutely hated him, absolutely, positively hated him. And as a Jew, he wasn't even supposed to have any type of business with Gentiles, non-Jewish people, because he was a Jew. He's not supposed to do that. That was the rule. You were supposed to go into business with Gentiles. And yet he's interacting with them. He's taking taxes from them, getting rich off of the struggles of his people. And he would have been treated incredibly poorly too. Now, although they couldn't have hurt him because he had a Roman guard, they treated him horribly. They would have yelled and screamed and cursed at him. They would have spit on him. They would have thrown rotten food as he's walking to his tax booth. Because the Roman guard, he's only got probably one or two, maybe two. But the Roman guard's not going to stop them from doing that. They just want him to be okay to be able to collect the taxes. They're not going to protect his dignity or save him from any type of shame at all. So Matthew's getting treated like garbage every time he goes to work, walking down the road. But this day was different because Jesus walks by the tax collector's booth. And instead of shouting obscenities and shouting profanity and calling Matthew names and tearing him down and shouting curses and grumbling and disowning him, Jesus instead says, "Follow me." And up to this point, Matthew had been completely rejected by every view of religious person around, and yet here he is being accepted and called by the rabbi. I mean, Jesus, when he says, "Follow me," he literally means follow in my footsteps, walk close to me, learn from me, to which everybody else, Peter and all of them probably went, hold on, he took money from me just last week, Jesus, and he took more than he needed, and you want him to come be part of our crew? Yeah, he'll be part of our crew. We got a gauntlet we got to take him through first. He ain't just showing up and rolling. We got to get rid of him. We got to fix him, Jesus. You can't just bring him in. Jesus, I think, knew that. I think that's why he walked by him and says, follow me. And so Levi, Matthew, got up and followed him. That sentence, we fly by it. When we're doing our devotional time, we don't spend any time on it, and we don't even pay attention to it. But that sentence is Matthew walking away from wealth. That's Matthew walking away from a life of security. That's Matthew walking away from everything that he has built to follow this rabbi. Now, that doesn't mean all those relationships that he damaged is going to be healed. And it certainly doesn't mean that all the things he's dealt with is going to be forgiven. It simply means that he's following Jesus. But Matthew's so grateful that Jesus saw him and saw his potential and says, you know what? I want to throw a dinner party for you, Jesus. Why don't you and your disciples come over to the house today? Got a big house, got lots of money. We'll feed you guys. I know you guys are moving through the area. Come over here. It'll be great. And so he did. And later that evening, while Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners, tax collectors had their own category. They were so gross in the eyes of the people that it was like, we have like murderers and thieves and bad people over here, and then there's tax collectors. They're real bad. And Mark makes sure that he accounts for this. Now remember, Mark is taken from the accounts of Peter. So you can hear Peter going, yep, I want to make sure everybody knows Matthew was a tax collector. He was a bad person. I had problems with Matthew. I didn't even like him that well. Didn't like him at all. And so while they were eating, Jesus sitting and eating with many tax collectors and sinners, and his disciples were there, were many who followed him. There were lots of people who followed him. And while he was there, the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, meaning religious higher-ups, they know the law back and forth. They could tell you all 613 commands and tell you how you broke them and tell you how close you got to them and how much you shouldn't break them. So they see all this and they notice Jesus is not supposed to be eating with those people. He shouldn't be in a room with sinners and tax collectors, because that means that in that day and age and culture, if you sat and ate dinner with somebody, because let's be honest, all y'all about to eat dinner with somebody today you don't like. Don't look at nobody. I'm just saying, all y'all about to go to Easter lunch and y'all be like, I don't want to hang out with Auntie Rita. She's so mean, right? Like you've got people like that, and you show up anyway. That's not how it worked in the first century. In the first century, if you didn't like something, you didn't invite them in unless they were family, right? Or like they had to be there, or it was one of those situations where you were inviting them into your life. It was a hospitable gesture that you were connecting with them on a deeper level besides, hey, how you doing out in the streets? So here they are having dinner, and Jesus is sitting with them, breaking bread with them. And of course, the religious leaders have to ask the question. They looked over, they asked the disciples, because they're not going to ask Jesus, because Jesus shows them up every time they ask a question. So this time they asked the disciples, and they say, hey, pay attention. Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? Has nobody told him he's a rabbi? Has nobody told him he went through the training and the teaching at the temple and that he shouldn't go around hanging out with sinners and tax collectors? Has nobody told him that they're nasty sinners? Has nobody told him that they are unworthy? I mean, come on, Jesus, you're supposed to know this. Peter, why is he doing this? And Peter's probably like, I don't know why he's doing this. I don't know why he's there. And Jesus overhears them. He overhears them, and he's going to have something to say. But first, let me tell you this. I don't know if you know this about Jesus, but Jesus loved to be in gatherings of sinners. Now, that was not the God I grew up with. That was not the version of Jesus that I grew up with. I didn't hear that Jesus loved to be in the room of sinners. For me, it was if you sinned, you weren't allowed in the room with Jesus. But the truth is that we find this all over the gospel. Jesus went out of his way to sit with the sinners. And he loves gatherings of sinners even today, because that's what this is. Welcome to church. Happy Easter. You're in a room full of sinners, chief among you. But that's the truth. And he loves opportunities like this. Why? Because it gives him a chance to show what God is like. That was his whole purpose. That's why he invited him into the table. And he said, bring your friends, your disgusting, horrible, nasty. I don't care what they've done. I don't care how broken they are. Bring all their dysfunction, bring all their issues, and have them sit with me. Because Jesus came to show us what God is like. So let me ask you this, or let me just tell you this. If your version of God isn't Jesus, or it doesn't match up with Jesus, or it's not the same lens, or you put it over top as an overlay and it doesn't fit, then it's the wrong version. Because the version of God that all of us should see is Jesus. And so he comes in and he sits at the table and he hears them bickering. He hears the religious leaders go after his disciples. And he says, hold on. Jesus said to them, and they weren't even talking to Jesus, but he heard him and he's like, no, you guys aren't going to do this. It's not the healthy who need a doctor. In other words, you guys know the good news. You have a relationship with God. That's not why I'm here. It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I've not come to call the righteous. Because if I was come to call the righteous, I'd just go to the temple and sit with you guys like you do and tell you how great you are. And, ooh, you know that passage of Isaiah. And, ooh, you know that passage of Jeremiah. That's not why I'm here, Jesus said. He said, I came for sinners. And I imagine that they all go, hold on, even these people? Did you say even these people? Even tax collectors? Even though they're taking money and stealing, Jesus, and ruining people's lives. Because, Jesus, I don't know if you've noticed, but it's kind of hard to get along in the first century, and we lose some money every so often to these tax collectors, but sometimes they take too much, and then I can't feed my family in a couple days. Jesus, are you sure you came for those people too? And he goes, absolutely, I came for those people. In fact, I invited them. I pulled up a couple extra chairs because I want them at the table. And in this instance, we see that no one is too far for Jesus. And this is my testimony. Like this is my testimony. There was a period of time based on the version of God that I had that I thought I was too far for the Lord, that he wouldn't want anything to do with me. I think things like, you know what? I'm too far to be redeemed. I've made too many mistakes. Without going into details, before I was saved, I had no problem lying straight to your face. I would lie right to your face, and then I would go do the next thing. And then I would do my best to remember the lie, because those of you that lie all the time, that's the problem with lying. You have to remember the lie you told. I had a pretty good memory, but it caught up. I would lie. I didn't have any problems lying. Selfish like you absolutely would not believe. And as a leader, I would put my needs above the needs of the people that I was leading. Not a very good husband. Kind of an absent father. I always put work in front of coming home, being part of the family. And I looked and I thought, and addicted to pornography, drinking way too much than what was healthy and right, addicted to nicotine in such a way that I was spending so much money it didn't matter, right? Selfish. And I thought that I'm too far to be saved. There's no way. Come on. I've seen my Aunt Charlotte. That was my thought. I've seen that tiny little church I was a part of in Ohio. Look, I know. There's a big difference between them and me, okay? It's not going to happen. I appreciate it. I'm too far gone. No one introduced me until I went to a small little church in North Carolina, the concept of Jesus sitting at the table with sinners. Does he not just sit at the table of sinners, but he sits at the table of sinners just like this table, and he invites them and says, eat with me. Revelation says he even comes to the door and knocks. Hey, you guys gonna let me in? I'd love to sit down and eat dinner with you guys. And I'm here standing before you today, still in dysfunction and issues and sin, but it's because somebody introduced me to a Jesus who sits at the table with sinners. Now, I don't know what version of God you grew up with, but if it's any version that doesn't allow space for him to sit with you in your sin, then it's the wrong version. And you might sit there and go, Pastor, you don't understand. That's not even that bad. Like, you listed your testimony. If you give me a second, I'll give you mine. We're going to be here for a minute, right? And some of you are like, man, I came in here, and Pastor, you lucky the place didn't catch on fire. I'm only here because she invited me. And that's the only reason I'm even here, right? Or like maybe grandma invited you and promised she was going to take you out and make your favorite dessert, and that's the only reason you're here. I don't know. But maybe you're bought off by your family members to come in. And you sit back and you think, look, I don't think you understand, Brandon. If I was to get up and give my testimony, the church would riot. Like, I couldn't do that. If I was to start talking about it, I'd catch on fire. There's just no way. There's just no way that I could even talk about it and describe it and explain it. I'm too far to be redeemed. I'm too far to be saved. But you're not. No matter what you've done, you're not too far for Jesus. You're not. You're not too far. And we see that later on in the story. On Good Friday, Jesus is hanging on the cross. And those of you that aren't familiar with crucifixion, what they would do is they would drive the nails into your hands. First, they lashed him 39 times because 40 is too much. 40 will kill you, but they'll take you right up to 39 just so you don't die. And they would thrash you across the back, and they had the whip had spikes and goat's bone in it. So it would tear at the skin and rip at the skin. Now, the whole purpose of that before the crucifixion was to fillet the back of your back so that when they put you on the cross, you'd have to grind your open wounds up against the tree in order to breathe. Because you didn't die from blood loss when it came to crucifixion, you died of asphyxiation. Because the weight of your body as you're hanging on the cross would weigh you down so much that your lungs would eventually collapse. And so you would suffocate. And everybody has the natural feeling of trying to resist. And so they would lash your back so that as you pulled up, and they would separate the muscles on the shoulder so that as you're sitting here, you'd pull up to breathe for just a second, to catch your breath long enough, and then slump back down. And so on that Friday, Jesus is hanging on the cross between two criminals. Some accounts say that they were thieves. They certainly weren't just thieves because they didn't kill thieves with crucifixion. They may have been thieves, and that may have been what they're famous for, but they had had to have done numerous other things like murder, rape, rebellion against the Roman Empire. It would have had to have been terrible things. And one of the criminals sitting up there, they hurled insults at him. It said, "Aren't you the Messiah? Can't you jump down and save yourself?" Surely you can. Come on, you're super powerful, Jesus. We've heard things about you. Save yourself. Save yourself. And save us. But one of the other criminals, the one on his right, sits there and says, "You know what? You don't get it. We're not the same. We are punished justly. He is not. He's not punished justly at all." And so this man did nothing wrong. Then this criminal turned to Jesus. Now remember, he's not going to make it to church on Sunday. He's not going to make it except for a few hours. He's not going to make it to church. He's not going to be able to sign up for a small group. He's not going to be able to join the team. He's not going to be able to start giving. He's not going to be able to start serving the poor. He's not going to be able to even say he's sorry to the people that he hurt. He's not able to make it right. He's going to be dead in but a few hours. And his name is going to be lost to history. Nobody's going to know anything about him except this one story, this one account of what happened. And then he said to Jesus, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." There's no good that he could do. His ledger is full. His legal pad has nothing but bad things in it, and there's not going to be any chance for God to add any good ones because he's going to die in just a few hours. perhaps minutes after he speaks. And Jesus, remember, thinking how hard it is to breathe, how hard it is to get words out right now because of the way he's been beaten and bloodied, and he's suffering from from exhaustion and blood loss. And Jesus, on the cross, hanging there between his nails, pulls himself up with the strain and exhaustion of the day. And with one sentence, I think he looks at him and says, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." And then he slumps back down because that's all the strength he can muster, is to say those words. Now I imagine that guy gets to heaven. And when he gets to heaven, they go, what, hold on, your ledger's full. What are you doing? It's all bad stuff. I don't know. Jesus told me I could be here. Jesus told me I could show up. And if your version of God or your version of God that you grew up with doesn't allow for that, then it's the wrong version. And I'm so sorry that you have that. But this is the version of God that we see demonstrated in Jesus. That you're never too gone, you're never too far, and that there's always room for you at the table. Jesus sits and eats with sinners. And people rebuked him and the religious leaders hated him for it. But yet he gave his life for sinners. And so I don't know what type of dysfunction you have. I don't know what your issues are. I know that you have them because me too. What I do know is that you're struggling with something. You have some sort of sin. You have something. And listen, we all do. And I'm here to tell you that there's room for you at the table. There's room for you at the table. You don't have to have it all together to eat dinner with Jesus. Matthew literally they said, "Follow me," and then later that evening he was eating with Jesus. The criminal on the cross, he's sitting there and there's no way he's going to make it to Sunday school. And he turns around and says, "You know what? Be with me, Lord." And he's with him. So I don't know what you've gone through and the extent of things that you struggled with, but I'm here to tell you that there's room for you at the table, regardless of how messed up your past is and all the things you've done and all the things that you've done to hurt people. It doesn't matter because the Lord looks and says, "I've got space for you at the table." All you have to do, it's an invitation, it's an open invitation. All you have to do is accept the invitation. That's it. That's all you have to do. "Oh, but come on, Brandon, I got a lot of things, got a lot of bad. I need to get my act right before I can show up to Jesus." No. That's not what Jesus says. He shows up to Matthew, whose act is not together, and says, "Follow me." And then he ate at the table. He shows up with the criminal on the cross, whose act was never going to get together. And he says, "You will be with me in paradise." And so I'm here to tell you today, there's room for you at the table. You don't have to experience this alone. You can experience life with Jesus regardless of your sin, because that's why he came. Not for the righteous, but for people like us, so that we can know him. I want to pray with you in just a moment. I want to pray for those of you who are ready to accept the gift and the invitation to the table, but you've never done that. Then I want to pray with those who've been believers for a long time and you've realized that you're still carrying all that stuff and your version of God was the wrong version of God. I want to pray with you as well. Let's pray together. Lord, thank you. Thank you for the truth and the reality that there is space at the table. Thank you for your love and for your mercy. Lord, for many of us, we've never heard this version of you. We haven't thought about it in this manner. But you sat at the table with sinners. And you didn't do it once, Lord. You did it time and time and time and time again, showing us that there's space for us, space for our dysfunction, space for our problems. That we don't have to have it all together to sit with you and to be with you. So, Lord Jesus, I want to pray for those in the room who've never accepted that invitation to the dinner party. They've never accepted that invitation that stands open every day to follow you. So, Lord, for those of us who've never accepted you, we acknowledge the need and desire for you. We accept you and the gift that you've given us, and we want a seat at the table. We believe that you raised from the dead and were resurrected on that third day and ascended to the right hand of the Father. Lord Jesus, we follow you now, committing our lives to follow you, like Matthew and Peter and all the other disciples. And that we'll put you first in our life. For those who've been followers of you for a while, but maybe we're still carrying the view of you that's inaccurate, the view of God that's not the right one. Lord, pray that your Holy Spirit would guide us and direct us and show us that we should be looking at Jesus and the example that he gave, not what we see. So Lord, we love you. We praise you. It's in your Son's name. Church said?